G'day groovers, rockers, and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking with former guitarist of Paul Revere and the Raiders, Jim Valley. Jim has been in music since the late 1950s as a teenager, and after being in various bands, Jim joined Paul Revere and the Raiders in 1966. He joined the band at just the right time, as it is the period Jim was in the band that would become the band's most remembered era in music. Jim is featured on songs such as Hungry and Good Thing, both of which were featured on the soundtrack to the 2019 film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Jim left the group in 1967, but stayed in music. More recently, Jim has been working on his solo albums, having released 3 brand new ones since 2020. G'day Jim, and welcome to Vinyl Vibes.
Thank you. Top of the morning.
Yeah, top of the morning to you too, Jim. And I think let's just start off at the beginning. You were born in 1943 in Tacoma, Washington. What can you tell me about your childhood growing up?
You know, some of my earlier memories, by the time I was 4, our family had moved to Seattle, a place called Madison Park. It was maybe 3 blocks from the lake. It was fairly idyllic. I mean, I remember my elementary teachers. It was a wonderful place to start my life. I played Little League Baseball, was in Cub Scouts, and our family sang in the car. My dad played piano. My mom played piano a little bit, and my grandparents also. I guess in the 7th grade, we had moved to a different, further north than where we lived. If I'd have stayed in that area, I would have gone to high school with Jimi Hendrix. But he and I later I found out we got our guitar at almost the same store, within a few months of it. He was left-handed, I was left-handed. The guy that I bought the guitar from says, well, we have to order one. It costs us, $30 more. But you use both hands, so why not go right-handed? I said, I need this guitar today. So that's how it started. But anyway, moving back in the 7th grade is when rock and roll came out. Bill Haley in the comments, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? Trying to think of his name. But anyway, I just, part of my soul just went crazy, and I couldn't stop moving my feet. So dancing was the first expression. I played the trumpet from the 4th grade on, and was in a group, kind of a Glenn Miller group called the Moonlighters. We didn't play for money, but one of the parents had all the charts and so on and so forth, and we played it at intermissions of different events. But in the 7th grade, when rock and roll came out, I was, as my mom would say, I was flabbergasted. And then in the 9th grade, a turning point, we had a variety show. Our junior high school was one of the largest, junior high schools in the state. And it had a beautiful assembly place. I mean, not just a gymnasium, but a stage was like an opera house. And so our band played, and different people did solo things. And I think I might have done a solo thing on the trumpet. But then they had a guest group from a high school called Shoreline, and they were called the Frantics. They were the first white rock and roll group in the Seattle area. And they came, and they were the special guests. They played like 3 or 4 songs. That's when my eyes spun around like Mr. Toad, and I went, wow, look at that electric guitar. Mm-hmm. I'd love the music. I'd never seen it played live. And I remember going up and asking them if they might need a trumpet player. And they said, we're probably good. But from seeing that's where, and around the same time in the 9th grade, I was in a choir, a beautiful canto, it was a cappella choir, and there were 3 girls there that would come early to rehearsal and sing songs that one of them had written, early rock and roll songs. They taught me how to play these 4 chords. And with that, I wrote a song for one of those girls named Cassie. So, well, oh, Cassandra. I played it for my next door neighbor. This is in 9th grade. Mm. He said, oh, that's a great song. I know a guy that just got a set of drums for Christmas. I know a guy that has a guitar in his house. He didn't play it, but it was an acoustic, missing a couple of strings. And then a guy that played saxophone really, really hot. And so, I don't know, within 2 weeks, they came over to my house, and I played him this song, and we learned like 3 songs, and we decided they would call ourselves Vince Valley and his Chain Gang. And we played about a month later at an intermission at a public dance in one of the, close to where we lived. My mouth got kind of dry. We did an Elvis song. We did my song, a couple other songs. And one guy in the audience, after we finished, he says, hey, Valley, how long have you been doing this? And I said, about a month. And he said, oh, he didn't say, well, you're going to be great, keep it up. But I knew that our rock and roll band was lacking of something, which was an electric guitar and, maybe even an electric bass. So that's when I went and bought this guitar and went to high school, found a really great piano player who eventually wrote Granny's Pad. We became the Viceroys, Vince Valley and the Viceroys. And then there was Jim Valley and the Viceroys. I said, we're not that great. I don't think I want my name associated with this band. Became the Viceroys. And for 6 years, we played basically high school PTA dances.
The Viceroys, I think they became one of the most popular bands in Seattle at the time, at least from what I've read. I mean, what was that like, being a popular band, locally kind of popular, throughout the late 50s, early 60s kind of thing? What was that experience like?
Oh, well, 63 is when we recorded Granny's Pad, and we became kind of like local stars, sort of. One of our highlights in that, when Granny's Pad came out in 1963, so we were asked to back a national concert in the Opera House in Seattle. It was called, I think, Spring Spectacular. And the Beach Boys with I Get Around and were, peaking, just amazing. They were headliners, but Little Eva and recording artists were on the show, so we backed them up. We learned their songs and we backed them up. Well, then a month before the show, Fingertips came out with little Stevie Wonder. He became the headliner, even though they only had that one song. And so we're there rehearsing, and that morning there was an 11 o'clock and a 1 o'clock show, and at around 11:30, 12 o'clock, in comes little Stevie Wonder with a drummer and his road manager, and they look at us, and we're like suburban white guys playing, and they look at us and said, "Well, you're not backing Stevie." I said, "Well, we thought he was going to have his own band." "Well, we're going to go find the band." Okay, so the show starts, gets to the Beach Boys. Their kids are screaming, almost like the Beatles, a few years later. And then after the Beach Boys are finished, in walks Stevie Wonder, in the back stage door with his manager, drummer, and a saxophone and a trumpet player. And the road manager looks at me and says, "Okay, you're backing them." Okay. So we backed him without any rehearsal. Fingertips was 2 chords. He did Hallelujah by Ray Charles, which we knew. They had charts. And then they did Bring It On Home to Me, which was a classic song. One of the memorable parts was that I had the cojones to ask their manager if I could take him to lunch. And he says, "Yeah, put your arm out like this." Stevie Wonder, tucked his arm around your arm, and we walked off to a place called the Food Circus. One of the things that happened was that when we were finishing lunch, these 2 teenage guys walk up and recognize him and know who he is and say, "Hey, we want your autograph." So he takes out this card with a picture of him and his name in Braille. And they say, no, we want you to sign it." I said, "Come on, give us a break. We're having lunch." And Stevie Wonder says, I'll sign it. So you picture how he would sign it. And then as they walk off, he said to me, "My mama always taught me to be kind to everyone." And that's Stevie Wonder's charisma through his life. I mean, he's just kind of like kindness incarnate, besides his magic music that he creates and sings and performs. So that's a moment I'll never forget. And I got to introduce him, 4 years later, I was in the Raiders, and we were on Where the Action Is. And Stevie Wonder was doing, I think, Blowing in the Wind. And I believe that I got to introduce him. But anyway, that's early Viceroys.
And in saying that, you've mentioned Granny's Pad a few times, and do you remember recording that? I think you recorded it in the spring of 63. Do you remember much about the actual recording process of the song?
We were in this guy, kind of a garage studio that this man had, and it was live 2-track, and we recorded Granny's Pad and another song called Blues Bouquet. That was it. We recorded those 2 songs. I don't know. I can't remember that we recorded it 2 or 3 times, but I think we played it. It was a fairly simple song. I think we got it. It was just the way it was. We signed with a local company, and it cost us $500. It cost us $500 to sign with them in a sense, and then they did the recording. They pressed the first 545s. It became a hit. It was on a radio station, KJR, Battle of the New Sounds, and it kept winning. And finally, they had to chart it. And at the time, it sold like 25,000 copies, which was a lot for a local record. And Paul Revere and the Raiders, unbeknownst to us, were in Idaho. They were playing it. In fact, the at one point the next year we were booked to play in Oregon, a place called Seaside, Oregon, a club called the Piper Club, where they predicted we would have 800 kids on a percentage of the door, and they said they loved your record down here, so we were jazzed. We went down and we played this. We had 80 kids. Where's the other 700 kids? They're up the beach at another place, another town, and there's this new group out of Portland. They wear three-cornered hats, and they're wild and crazy. They do book their own dance, and they have 1,000 kids up there. So they just booked the wrong days. But that's the first time I've ever heard that name. I said, what an amazing name for a band, Paul Revere and the Raiders. And then within a month, going back to Seattle, the Viceroys were booked to play at a place called the Spanish Castle, which was, an epic rock and roll dance place. Pat O'Day, the same guy that booked us at that Spring Spectacular, had called me and said, hey, Jim, would you share your stage with this band from Portland? They're called Paul Revere and the Raiders. And I said, absolutely. And that's when I first heard them, saw them, fell in love with them. Just a throwaway around. If you ever need a guitar player, let me know. Anyway, then we became friends with them. We played dances together because we were no competition to them. We were kind of more like jazz rock. Anyway, they got us an audition in San Francisco at a place called the Peppermint Tree. We played down there, and that's the point where I decided that I was gonna leave the Viceroys. That their music was too jazzy. I wanted to be more funky and whatever, and I didn't know where I was going from there, but that was the plan. We came back to Seattle, and then there was a radio dance out at a place called Parker's, which is also a very amazing 1930s dance hall. And the ad came on that Down in the Good Times, first time in Seattle, wilder and crazier than Paul Revere and the Raiders. And I'm like, well, I want to see those guys. Mm-hmm. So I went out, saw them. They were awesome. I mean, they were playing, Willie Bully and Do You Love Me and just great hot rock and roll. And their manager asked me if I knew anyone, the guitar player that sang, and because their guitar player was a great guitarist, but not, a great stage presence. And I said, well, I'd think about it, not considering me, but considering, other guitarists that I knew. And that night I couldn't sleep, and all of a sudden I went, it's me. I'm going to join you. So I called him the next day and said, I found your guitar player. Who is it? Me. You'd leave the Viceroys to join John the Good Times? Absolutely. So I did. I wrote a song for him called Little Sally Tees, and we became a giant, rock and roll force in the Northwest. I was only with them for a year, but sometimes we do battles of the bands with the Raiders and win.
You mentioned, of course, Little Sally Tees there, and I think that was even covered by the Kingsmen at the time. And I mean, when the Kingsmen did record their version of the song, I was kind of thinking too. I had the drummer of the Kingsmen on here, Dick Peterson. I think he joined their band in '63. So I was thinking too, like, do you have any memories of the Kingsmen from that time, or of Dick Peterson, the drummer?
I met Dick Peterson, as years went by, but my first recollection of the Kingsmen, because we never saw them play. They were from Portland, and they did Louie Louie, and we all thought it was not a big deal. I mean, they kind of copied a group called the Wailers, even the solo and whatever. We thought it wasn't a big deal, and it became the recording that made the big hit. Mm. So later, I met, Don Gallucci, who was the leader of Don Good Times, was the one that taught, he was the keyboard player for the Kingsmen at that time. He was still in high school. He taught them Louie Louie. I mean, he taught them missing a beat. Da 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 da. So he kind of took that intro and flipped it in half. And it was just, the drums sounded great. It just was recorded. It just jumped out of your speakers. And so the Raiders recorded, Louie Louie in the same studio, like 2 weeks apart. The Raiders was on Columbia Records, but the Columbia Records guy thought rock and roll was in its final stages and didn't really think it was here to stay, so they didn't promote it. But Sheridan Records also, I can't remember that was their local label, the Kingsmen recorded with, and then they got on another label, and somebody in Boston thought that they said some horrible words in there, and they were banned in a couple of states. One state, and because of that, everyone wanted to hear it, and it became the big deal.
1966, the long-awaited call to join Paul Revere and the Raiders came. I mean, take me through that moment when you kind of finally got to join, the group you've always kind of wanted to join at that point.
Drake Levin, their guitar player, was drafted and was able to go into the National Guard for 6 months. The Good Times were playing on the Lloyd Saxon show. So we were in Hollywood, and we had signed with Dunhill Records. And so we thought we were fairly close to maybe breaking through. And Paul Revere comes to the hotel and, takes me up to his car and gives me a pep talk about joining the Raiders, and which I had wanted to do. But I said, our group is really close to making it. I feel, I'd like to go through some of these stages rather than just jump up to your group. And he gave me a talk about, well, a lot of groups get this close and that close, but very few of them, get to where we are right now with Columbia Records and where the action is. And, Columbia wanted to send them on an international or to England, and they wanted me to write songs for them, and I would get X amount of dollars. And so I talked to her with my band and said, we think you should do it. So I did. So when I joined, I was flown down to LA, and I watched them for a week or so. I rehearsed with the bass player and the guitar player and Paul a little bit. We never really had a rehearsal. Did our first date in Albuquerque, Dick Clark tour with Jerry Lewis and the Playboys as headliners. And so but at one point, Paul said in that first meeting, so what I think you should do is take a leave of absence from the Good Times for like 40 days. We'll take you on a tour. If the band likes you, we'll keep you for 6 months. At that point, if the fans, relate to you more than did to Drake, then you're in for good. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take a leave of absence. If I join you, I join you. I think what I do will work in with the group, because I had an affinity for all of them. So anyway, the first concert that I did with them, we had a rehearsal for a half hour before the concert. That was the only full rehearsal we had. And in the middle of, speaking of Louie, there was a bar in front of the stage, that so he wouldn't fall off. It was a huge cow palace or something. And I hung by those bars upside down and played Louie Revere. I said, wow. And then 3 days later, he came to me and said, Harpo, because he gave me that name, he said, we've never sounded better. We've never felt better. You're in for good. So 3 days later, I was there. I used to say that I was kind of like, lightly speaking, like when Ringo joined the Beatles, that I was kind of their missing link to their charisma, that I had the smile and the happy-go-lucky charisma that fit in with them, and we became. I think that was their biggest year, 66 and 67, and we had done some others left.
Well, I mean, it sounds like too, I think that tour you mentioned there, I think that started in like March 1966 or something like that. I mean, on that first tour, it sounds like you must have had a great time then, because you felt like at home pretty much straight away in the group. I did,
and the year was a magic year. Our first album, or the album that I recorded with them first, was called The Spirit of 67. And Paul didn't even come to recording sessions. Van Dyke Parks was our keyboard player. There was a guy named Jerry Cole, who was our hot guitar player that played some of those leads. We were, I was supposed to have a song. Phil had 2 songs. Smitty had a song. Mark had 6 or 7 songs. But we were ready towards the end of those sessions to record, one of my songs. And then Mark came out of the restroom and said, I just wrote a new song. It's got to be on this album. I said, no, Mark. I said, we're getting ready to run down my song. He said, no, you're new, Harpo. You can be on the next album. Somehow Terry Melcher, the producer, acquiesced. And that was a heartbreak. It was kind of the beginning to the end, even though it was early on. And it was kind of showing things to come where Mark would like jump in front of me when I'm after a while doing a guitar solo on stage to draw attention to himself. I guess all bands had that, but that's what happened. And after I left, then 2 of the other original guys left, and they were never the same.
I mean, you mentioned Terry Melcher there, I think, and he obviously produced the Byrds before he produced you guys. I mean, what did he kind of bring on the production side of things? What did he bring to the Spirit of 67, the album? Like, what did he bring to the production side of things?
He was amazing. To me, he was a genius, and he knew how to, 8 tracks, I think is what we had, or we had 2 4 tracks, overdubbing this and that. He made the Raider sound, even though they had Just Like Me in the beginning, but his recording of Kicks and Hungry and all those songs, he was one of the producers. He and Brian Wilson. He was that other crazy guy that shot somebody.
Oh, Phil Spector.
Spector was definitely at the top of the mark too. he was like royalty. I mean, Doris Day's son, but he was a beautiful guy, and we became close friends. And I used to go up to his house, and we'd sing at the piano and whatever. And that's his house was where Sharon Tate met her demise, and that all happened because Dennis Wilson had somehow befriended Charlie Manson. Charlie Manson became a roadie for the Beach Boys, and also he was a songwriter. The Beach Boys actually did a video of one of Charlie Manson's songs, but anyway, Dennis brought Charlie up to meet Terry and to see if Terry might want to record him, and he played some songs for Terry. And Terry laughed at his songs, and they weren't supposed to be funny, and so that's why Charlie got a little crazier. He decided that Terry was, the white ruling class that stopped Charlie from succeeding at being a star. That was Green Squad up to Terry's house, and he had moved out, unbeknownst.
I mean, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the film, I mean, that features 2 songs from your time in Paul Revere and the Raiders, and it also depicts like that situation which you were just describing there as Sharon Tate. I mean, did you see that film, or have you seen that film?
Yeah, I did. I got to see it. I was in Las Vegas doing a documentary for someone who was trying to do a Paul Revere and the Raiders documentary. But anyway, in that movie, for like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 seconds, they show a part of the Spirit of 67 album, where they just show the part with Paul Revere and myself. And I went, wow, I'm on the big screen. Holy moly. But toward the end of the movie, I went, oh, this is not going to end well. And it did end well. You saw the movie?
Yes, I did, many times. Yeah. No, great movie. Yeah, I mean, and in saying it too, I mean, how well did it capture the 60s? I mean, as someone that was there, I mean, 60s LA, I think it was. I mean, did it capture it pretty well?
I think so. I lived in Laurel Canyon, was friends with Jenny Doherty of the Mamas and Papas, and Jackson Brown became a good friend. Yeah, it was a magic time. We really believed that the world was changing, that the hippies and the flower children had touched into, universal love. That's where it was all going. And wars would stop and yada, yada, yada. And it seemed for a while that was going to happen, and then it didn't. But that's still kind of where my songs come from that special place.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you too, I mean, like that opening riff to Good Thing, I mean, was that you playing that? The dun, 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 dun. Is that you?
No, that was Jerry Cole.
Oh, okay.
He had to teach me how to play that.
Well, are there any like moments on that album that you look back now and go, like, that was some good guitar playing on your end?
The Great Airplane Strike, that line in there, but I can't even quite bring it to focus it. But that was kind of almost like a Rolling Stones kind of line. I mean, I played on like Phil's song In My Community, did good guitar stuff, and then Van Dyke Parks was our keyboard player, and they were wonderful moments. I mean the Raiders days were filled with, you were either out on tour and then being on the bus or being on a plane or something, but in LA we were filming Where the Action Is. You were doing photography shoots for all the fan magazines and interviews, and then you were recording at night. So your days were pretty filled. You were on the set of Where the Action Is at 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah, okay. I mean, and what was, I mean, because Where the Action Is, I think that was presented by Dick Clark. I mean, who also did Bandstand. I mean, what was he like as like a person, Dick Clark?
He was just a true gentleman. I mean, he was very kind. I mean, I didn't, I went to his house. He did a couple of interviews with me, but it wasn't like I hung out with him and really knew, what his, where his passion came from. But he was definitely just a beautiful, kind person that kind of stayed almost until the end, forever young.
Of course, you mentioned earlier too that you wanted to record some songs with the Raiders, and of course it didn't end up happening. But I was kind of thinking too, like do you remember what those songs were, and did you end up recording any of them later for like your own kind of albums?
Yeah, there was a song called Try, 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 which actually Terry and I kind of worked on a little bit. He helped me a little bit with that. And when I left the Raiders that summer, I guess Columbia had a lock on me for 6 months. But I moved in with Kurt Betcher, who produced The Association, Tommy Rowe. He loved my songwriting. And he said, let's go in and record something. So we went in and recorded 3 songs, which I'd give my left foot to find those again. And at one point, around that interim time, I signed with Dunhill Records. And at one point, I was with Jay Lasker, who was the president at that point, and he brought Kurt and his friend that was his executive producer came in and played this recording of Try, Try, Try. It was kind of like sunshine pop. Jay said, "Well, I don't know. What do you think, Jim?" And I was going through a dark period in my life of kind of like a little bit of psychedelic depression, and but that's something I couldn't really tell anyone about, or tell especially just record people about. And I kind of my attitude was, well, I don't know, kind of, I didn't really. And then he said, well, we think we should use the Mamas and Papas, recording people and re-record it. I went, well, okay. And so they did. It was Hal Blaine and Larry Knechtel and whoever. But it just kind of started at one place and ended. There was not a lot of dynamics. I sang over it, the next week, did 2 overdubs. They released it. They thought it was going to be a big hit, but it wasn't. I ever got to bubble under anything. But I was with him for about a year. Gabriel Meckler became a dear friend of mine, and he produced me. Later, he produced Steppenwolf, and he didn't really know rock and roll, but he wanted me to co-produce that album. I said, Gabriel, I can hardly find my way around my own house right now. If there's anything I can do to help on it, I would. And so he produced it. But when John Kay, who was the lead singer, when they were recording Born to Be Wild, his voice was raspy, like on a scale of 1 to 10, about a 14. And somehow Gabriel couldn't get him to come back down from that. And so he had me come to the studio, and I talked to him. I said, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you're singing at a 10, bring your energy down to about a 7, same spirit. And so he did. And that's how his voice came out on Born to Be Wild, and the rest was kind of history. Then Gabriel later produced Janis Joplin's last album. But he was an amazing guy, classical pianist from Israel.
I think you also recorded an album for Dunhill Records. I don't think they released it. I think it was called Walking Through the Quiet. I mean, are the master tapes still out there for that album that was unreleased?
But that album never got released. In fact, it was amazing. It was, I'd lived in a cave in Big Sur, and so Walking Through the Quiet, kind of coming out the other side of this depression, and Walking Through the Quiet came out of that experience. Jerry Sheff, who was a bass player, in fact, he played on these sessions with Kurt Betcher. He later was the key bass player, or the musical director of Black and White Nights. He produced this album and, used some strings at times. There's a person from the Atlantic Rhythm section that came and recorded on it. Backtracking a little bit, when I left the Raiders, Jerry Denon, who was the guy that in Seattle, the Don and the Good Times, had recorded one of my songs as a demo called "There Is Love" with a stand-up bass and kind of like almost in the realm of classical music. And he released it after I left the Raiders, and it became a hit in Atlanta and Chattanooga. And so that next year, I was asked to be on Herman Sherman's tour at 2 dates. And the Atlantic Rhythm section was a hot group in that, and they backed up. Cherry Baby, who became a giant, iconic rock and roll singer, was on that tour. I had one song, and one of the guys from the Atlantic Rhythm section came and played with me in L.A. on that Walking Through the Quiet album. I'd love to get those tracks. I'm working on it. Dunhill might still have them. There's a couple of people that are working on it for me.
Okay.
Try to get those tapes.
We're at the end of '68 around, I think by the time this unreleased album's recorded, I mean, the Vietnam War is becoming more aggravated. There's been 4 assassinations, JFK, RFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all this is happening in America. And you're kind of talking about earlier about how, towards, that kind of hippie era, how the 60s was, there was so much peace and love, and now we're getting towards the end of it. And there's not so much peace and love kind of, going on. It's starting to kind of degrade a bit. I mean, how was that seeing America change from that kind of peace and love kind of hippie era to kind of, the tail end of the 60s, early 70s, very different kind of thing going on there? Like, take me through that. Yeah.
Well, for me, I had, left Laurel Canyon for Big Sur, ended up for a while living in a cave. So I was in a kind of a world by myself. I remember at one point, a forest ranger coming up and saying that there was a funeral in San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury, where it was the death of the hippies, where had a big casket and everybody threw their beads in. And what does that mean to me? I said, it doesn't change my perspective of how I view the universe and spirit and nature and so on and so forth, and friendship and love. And so I kind of kept in that same place. You know, in the 80s, I formed Rainbow Planet, which was a friendship workshop, and went around the world with that. But it was kind of, for music, for me, it was like kind of a dark period. I mean, the Stones and Led Zeppelin and Cream, I mean, not that they didn't have magic songs, but it wasn't the same. It was more, I think, hard rock sort of came in at that point. Just wasn't the same. But by that time, I had come back to the Northwest. In 1980, I was asked by a dear friend to work with high school kids in the gifted program. Then I also said I'd love to work with some younger kids, so they set up a workshop for kindergarten and first graders. So at the end of that, there were 2 years of that. There was a nice article in the newspaper here locally, and a principal from another school system called me the very next day and said, maybe you're the person we're looking for. Could you write a song that would help kids learn to get along and lead a workshop at it? And I said, absolutely. And so I took that concept of we all ride the same spaceship traveling through our universe. We all share the same sunshine, get along. We can learn to get along just a matter of time. Yeah, you know, so on and so forth. And it became a song that schools wanted to sing. So it was a we. It wasn't an I song. It was a we song. So Rainbow Planet, a lot of that used the we pronoun. You know. Then I was asked to do this workshop, which we called Rainbow Planet. That's kind of steamrolled, and then I was doing workshops around this area, around the state. Eventually, I did a workshop for teachers down in Santa Cruz, and principals from different parts of the country were there. And then I was going to Florida, to Chicago, to New Hampshire, different parts of the U.S. And at the same time, early on, I think one of my first workshops, one of the kids came to me and said, well, our class wrote this poem. Could you set it to music? So that became part of the workshop. If they wanted to participate in that, the classes would do a cooperative poem on friendship, imagination, environment, and whatever. And then I'd set it to a song. Some of those songs made it onto albums. So I got to co-create with really fresh imaginations.
Are you still doing a lot of work with Rainbow Planet? Like, is it still going strong?
Not as much, because the COVID kind of stopped it. And even then, schools got to a point where, you know, they testing and, you know, they took kind of the fun out of education in a lot of school districts.
It's been quite a productive 3 years for you, actually. I mean, I think you've had 3 albums in the last 3 years. And of course, the first one came in 2020, a Garden Fair instrumental album. Like that was made during, I think, the lockdown period. Like, how did that all come to be? Yeah, during that lockdown period, yeah. Okay,
so there's a dear friend of mine on the East Coast, Ken Onstad, that was involved. It's been a cheerleader for myself and Rainbow Planet for years. I'd heard a song that, you know, I'd send him, you know, demos once in a while, or just songs with me playing piano on it. He said, you should do a piano album. So, and then he put me together with a guy in California that had done some, and he played stringed harp and harmonica. So we got together, Bruce Curnow, wonderful guy. Never met him in person. We've only talked on the phone and FaceTime, but I've sent him these tracks, and he's added this and that. We got to one song at one point on that Garden Fair album, and, you know, we kind of came to a dead end there, a standstill. And I said, well, I have a friend in Nashville. His name is Jim Hoke, and he plays like 13 instruments, and I'd like to run it by him. If you see the credits, like Hoke is playing, you know, he does flute, he does arrangements. His son plays cello. Anyway, on a song called, what's it called? Walter Popsicle, I think. He came up with stuff. He plays bass clarinet and all this stuff, and it just brought it to life. I mean, not that it wasn't alive before, but, you know, his additions have been amazing. So that's how that album came. Sit Upon the Moon was kind of the next step. It's still a relaxing album mostly, but with vocal, and some new songs, some songs that were on some of the family albums. And I say my Rainbow Planet stuff, even though it was for kids, it was never geared down to kids. It was kind of geared up to kids, and parents would enjoy it as much as the kids.
Of course, your latest album, Toward the Sacred, and it has a great track off that called Come to Me Slowly. And I was just kind of thinking, like, how did that song come to be? Like, yeah, how did you write it? Yeah.
Well, it's in a spiritual sense, in that it's kind of like God is talking to you. Come to. I'm not saying come to me. The spirit inside is saying to me slowly, and kind of. You can call me Father, Sister of the Sun, call me Darling, Loved One. That's how that happened, and and usually those things happen all at once. It wasn't like I work on it. There's some songs I've worked on for years, but a lot of these songs, they just happen in the moment.
And where can people go to keep up to date with everything you're doing? I mean, your website. I mean, how can we keep up to date to know when this album's coming out? Yeah.
Yeah, and if they go on jimvalley.com, they can check that out.
Well, Jim, I'm looking forward to hearing what comes of that album. Yeah, look, it's been great talking with you on the program today, and I just want to thank you for making the time.
Well, good pleasure. Thank you so much, Jack.
That was former guitarist of Paul Revere and the Raiders, Jim Valley. To check out Jim's recent music, you can head to his website at jimvalley.com. Remember to share this episode with other music fans, and if you really enjoyed this edition, let us know. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Vinyl Vibes, and to all you music lovers out there, you stay groovy.